Okay.
More important.
I think we.
And is Friedman out here? Thomas Friedman?
Thomas Friedman, yeah, I get him. I get him on the Times. I read him. But what happened was they had a thing here with Thomas Friedman, but I thought he was going to be here in person.
Oh,
So a friend of mine called me and asked me if I would join her. I said yes. You know, they have to pick me up, so if they call me, it's fine.
Okay.
All right. So I'll tell you about Thomas
tell him
Friedman.
at dinner.
Yeah.
Tell us at dinner.
So anyhow, where were we at?
Well, I don't know. You were talking. You
Oh,
said,
about the orange. Yeah, you said that the Coca-Cola, the reason you don't like Coca-Cola is because he made you drink. Well, you know, in my day, if somebody had a stomach ache, the immigrants, what did they do? They gave you castor oil, you know, but they mixed it with oranges so that you wouldn't taste the castor. Well, to this day, I can't eat an orange without tasting castor oil, just as you said with the Coke. But I eat it anyhow. But that's that particular thing. Let's see if I can think of other things. Well, you know, we.
Did you have,
Oh,
when you were living on Eldred Street, uh, did you have electricity?
no, we didn't have electricity. We had a coal stove, black coal stove, and we had gaslight. You know, we had those round thing it looked like. Well, I wanted to light the thing with a match, and the match fell, and I still have a scar here when I was burned from that thing there. Also, we had this coal stove. I'm going back to that, and I've often wondered why I don't like a cat. And I did ask my mother if there anything occurred in my life so that I don't like cats. She said yes. I said what? Well, when you lived on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, you had to worry about rats, and everybody had a cat. Well, I was a little girl, and she wanted to keep me warm in the high chair, so she kept the high chair near the coal stove. And the cat jumped up on the high chair, and I hugged the cat, and I leaned, it pushed me back against the stove, and I burned the back of my head. And apparently that must have remained with me, you know. And I do have a sensitivity back here. Very often, when my hair, I do have to scratch my head. It's very sensitive back there where I was burned. The tissue, I was really burned, you know. So that's probably one of the reasons. I don't know how true it is, but I think that's as good a reason as any, you know.
did you have radio?
We had, yes, when we lived to Brooklyn to 14th Street, we were very fancy. We got, first of all, I have to tell you this about getting a telephone. I was 14 years old before we had a telephone in the house, and that was when we moved to 14th Street in the two-family house. A four-family house, two downstairs out of the tenement into Brooklyn, and two on one floor, two downstairs. So we got a telephone. My father, you know, had this accent, and he wanted to be very funny. So he wanted to say, Shaner Mansion, right? So he answers the phone, and this is the way it sounds. Shaner Mansion means pretty people. So that was my recollection of getting the telephone. So, oh, and in that house too, what happened was I suddenly realized my mother didn't have a key, and I wanted to go to sleep early, or I went to sleep early, so I put a note on the door outside. The key is under the mat. Smart. You think of things you did when you were young, you know, it's really ridiculous almost. But that was a nice apartment, and wanted to help my mother when she had a paint job. And I was walking from one room to another carrying dishes, and my sleeve, I was wearing a bathrobe with a wide sleeve, got caught in the knob of the door, and I dropped those dishes and they broke. And oh God, I'll never forget how upset I was. It was quite a number of dishes from a set, you know. It was So it was very aggravating. Oh, those are all little things, you know. And when it came to buying clothes, and I was in college already, my mother would go to S. Klein on 14th Street in New York where you could get bargains. And she would pick up several things that she knew might fit me. And some of them did and some of them didn't. And then she would had the privilege of returning them. And one time I went with her to S. Klein, and I was trying on coats at the time. And this woman comes over to my mother and she says, "This is your girl?" She says, "Yes." She says, "Oh, have I got a boy for her?" And S. Klein. So none of the boys suited. I went out with another very nice fellow. He was a teacher at Lincoln High School. And you're going to think that I was something. He came wearing a black suit, black shoes, and white socks. And when we got into the subway, and we were going to a party, and when he sat down and his white socks showed from the black pants, I thought that was terrible. So I never went out with him again. Some of the things that I think of. Let's see, a few other little bits and pieces. I went going back to when I started going to college. First, I went to Maxwell Teachers College. For the first time in the history of New York, the Teachers College became a 4-year college with a degree. See, so that's where was sort of where I wanted to go. So here I am, 15 years old, and I apply to Teachers College. And I get turned down because I'm too young. So I go fight my own battle. I go up to the school and I make an appointment with the dean. And I did all of this on my own. And I said to her, "That's not fair." I said, "If I can qualify to graduate with honest aristocredit," and you'll see that on my diploma. It's the big thing that they stamp, aristocredit. And what difference does age make? I said, "Why don't you let me go, admit me, and then if I can't make it, then that will be my fault. And I don't see any reason why I shouldn't be admitted." So she said she'd have to take it up with the board. Well, finally, I was admitted. And for the reason that I came up and had the nerve, you might say, come up and fight my own battle and gave a logical whatever it is, so they admitted me. Now, Teachers College was very hard the first 2 years. You had 11 subjects that you had to take, and you had to pass those. And they really tested your mettle, and everybody that got into that class didn't stay in the class, you know. And I wanted to quit because it really was difficult. And my mother said, "Absolutely not. You've got to finish what you started. You were the one that was so insistent upon going. You fought your way into it, and even if it's difficult, you'll master it, but don't quit in midstream." And really, I might say she's the one who kept me going. And so that was it. Then after 2 years, they didn't need teachers in the city of New York. They had an overabundance of teachers. So what they did was they cut out the teachers' colleges and sent us to regular colleges. See? But what they did was the kids in Brooklyn went to Brooklyn College. The kids from Manhattan went to Hunter. The kids in Queens went to Queens College, and that's the way they distributed us. So I went to Brooklyn College. The same, but we were known as the Maxwell Group at Brooklyn College. That's that was our label, and we took. We didn't have elective courses. Our courses were spelled out for us. We took whatever the curriculum was handed to us. That's what we took. Okay. So then my graduation was at the Brooklyn Academy of Music. Now I'm going to go back to my high school graduation. For the first time, my high school graduation, I bought a pair of shoes that had heels. Not real high heels, but they called them Cuban heels. And my mother bought me a beautiful white dress. We wore a dress, not a cap and gown at high school. And at a very nice store in town, that was the first really expensive dress that I had. Okay. Now, we had to get into high school before the parents did. They wanted us to be there before. So I walked from 14th Street to 25th Street, which was where the high school was. I went to James Madison. Well, as I'm walking, there was a very big curb, and I stepped down. My dumb heel gets caught in the hem, and the hem comes down. Now, what do? Do I go back to the house, or do I go to school? So I figured I'll go to school. The teacher's there. There's a homeroom teacher. I'll probably have needle and thread or pins or something, and we'll work it out. So we get there, and she does have pins, straight pins, and she puts me up on a chair, and she pins the whole thing out. Okay. Comes time to get the diploma. I'm walking up on the stage, and with each step I take, I get stuck. She didn't put the pins in properly. And I want to tell you, I could still feel, and my mother doesn't know what's going on. Why am I walking so funny? And it really was quite a thing. Okay, so that's another episode in my life. That was that. So then, all right, so I get admitted to Maxwell Teachers Training, and I had a little trouble with the courses. It was hard, and I'd come home, and I was really a good kid. I mean, I'd get to school, I'd go to Woolworths, get my candy, go home, do my homework, fall asleep a little bit in the afternoon, and then we got a radio. We didn't have television, but we had a radio. We got a Fader radio. Everybody came to listen to our radio. It was such a big thing, Well, one Saturday afternoon, this is a great story. One Saturday afternoon, we lived in this house. This was the two-family house that we lived in. We had moved from the 14th Street apartment to this two-family house, and we lived upstairs. So you came up the steps, then you walked that way to the bedrooms, and this way you walked to the living room, dining room, and porch. Okay, so the radio was in the living room part. Okay. So we're listening one Saturday afternoon, and there was a Major Bowles. My father was home at that time for lunch or whatever, and it was the amateur hour. I don't know whether you ever heard of it, but you did? Well, they used to have amateur hours. So, then he'd ring the gong if somebody failed. Well, during this thing, my father had to go to the bathroom. So he goes all the way to the back there. Meantime, I'm a college girl, so I give myself a remind that the opera is on. The Metropolitan Opera is on, and I have to change to the opera. My father doesn't know I changed to the opera. He comes back. Lawrence Tibbett is singing a Wagnerian selection, and my father says he's definitely going to get the gong. That's the classic. I love that to this day. So, of course...
Tell everybody who Lawrence Tibbett is.
Well, Lawrence Tibbett was one of the most famous opera stars at that time. And incidentally, he died on the stage. They had some kind of scene with a sword, and he got hurt with the sword. Yeah, and that's how he lost his life. But that was really quite a scene, Okay, then I told you that I liked Ludwig Teller.
Well, do you want to do the radio? Just tell us a little bit about radio shows.
Oh, radio shows. You had Gus and Andy the black,
Amos
it's
and
Amos and Andy. Gus and Andy is a restaurant here, which incidentally I like. Amos and Andy. And you had a lot of comics. There was that straight-faced comic that was funny. You had, what's his name? The one that he's never older than 39, Jack Benny. You had all of those, Milton Berle. Well, that started with television. Now, that was when we got the television. We got fancy. So, the radio was a way of life. It really was.
how so?
Well, because how much entertainment did you have? You had the movies. Or, of course, my mother and father used to go to Jewish shows, and they did take me to Jewish shows on Second Avenue in New York. See, now that we're talking, I mean, sure, and we used to take me to see Jenny Goldstein. That's another story. Jenny Goldstein was, the Jewish shows were really funny. Jenny Goldstein, you had to have a ton of handkerchiefs. You didn't have tissues yet. You came with handkerchiefs because Jenny Goldstein was always very sad. One day, this was later on, I went to see this show, and it was at my father-in-law's house. And my father-in-law said, or my mother-in-law said, "What show did you see?" So I said, "I went to see that show." So, and all Jewish shows were alike. So Henry was there. He says, "Oh, that's the show where the husband leaves the wife in Europe, and he comes to the United States, and he becomes a Yankee Doodle dandy, and then she comes in, and So my father-in-law says, "When did you see the show?" And that was a classic. A classic plot. So he says to him, "When did you see the show?" So we really had a laugh about that because it was such a classic plot. But that was Jewish. Molly Picon, she was a wonderful, wonderful comedian and actress and so on. So we did go. You say, how do we spend time? Second Avenue shows, Jewish shows. Okay. Then, after I got married, and before even then, Oscar, I'll tell you about Oscar. Oscar took me to the Cotton Club. I mean, he made me more sophisticated already. He had been New Maxie Bear, that kind of thing.
How did you meet again?
All right, how did I meet? All right, so, now what the heck was his name? I just can't think of it. But he was the social director. And he asked me, I bet you that's Bella. Okay, where was I at now?
Well, you were
All right.
talking about how you...
All right, so I was at the,
Oscar.
yeah. So this, I was at the temple, and this man, his name escapes me. I should know his name. He asked me to come up if he wanted to offer me a job in the camp as a counselor. See, and I thought it was fine, being the summertime and all that. And that's where I met Oscar. Oscar was up there because they had springs there, and he went up for the summer because he was the doctor for the springs. You took me there. Remember when I visited?
Yes, this is near Saratoga.
That's right. No, not quite.
In the same area.
Yeah,
Same general
and
area.
he took me there. What'd I say? Not he took me there. He was there he had to examine people and so on. And so there was a hotel up there, and they asked me if I would be the counselor for the camp. See, so that's how I met Oscar. I came walking down the steps the first time. He was standing at the desk, and I saw him look at me, and it was a real romantic look. I'm telling you, it was a romance. And he said that the minute he saw me walk down there, he believes in love at first sight, and I was the girl he fell in love with.
Yet I've seen pictures of him with many women.
Lots of women before he met me. Don't forget, he was almost 11 years older than me. I was at that time, graduated, I was 19. I graduated from college at 19. And he was 11 years older, so he was 30. Okay? So he had had plenty of time to have a lot of girls. And I didn't have as many boys as he had girls, believe me. But I did tell you, I did like this Ludwig Teller. He was the one before Oscar. So, so we, I
Was it
did.
a fun summer for you? Was it a
Yeah,
very
it was a
romantic
nice summer. It was a nice summer. We had a gang of girls came out from I think it was Poughkeepsie, and boy, they were riots. They were wild. They came up there to have a wild time, and Oscar was having a wild time with them. He was having a good time. Why not? So, but I hung around and I did what I had to do. Took care of the kids, and there were other boys there. I danced, and that I was a good dancer, by the way. We did the Lindy Hop in those
So
days.
you worked in one of the many hotels.
I worked in that one of the hotels. Yeah, I forget the name of it now. Gee, you forget things. My God, that's what. I'm married about 60 some odd years now. If I wanted to figure out the marriage years. So that summer was very nice. And then we got back to New York, and he started to call me. He did call me. And the way we used to meet, I would take the subway and meet him halfway in New York. Then he would make some house calls that he had to make. Then he would drive me home. That was the big date. And then he would go back to the Bronx, which was a big ride, So that's how it went. Now, when it came to getting married,
Why was he making house calls in Manhattan?
no, he was making house calls in the Bronx. I would meet him in Manhattan, and we would drive to the Bronx to make his house calls. Doctors made house calls in those days. And then we would go back, I would meet him at a destination, and he would meet me there. Then we'd go back to the Bronx. Then he would drive me back
All
to
the way from
Brooklyn.
the Bronx
Yeah, to Brooklyn, and that was a big thing,
Would you wait in the car for him or go
No,
out?
I would wait in the car. So this happened, about once or twice a week, something like that. And then he had a friend, Eddie, who had a boat, and we'd go out on the boat. I have pictures.
Is that Eddie Finfer?
Yeah, Eddie Finfer, and we'd go out on the boat, and we'd, do things like that, go to the movies and so on. And then he wanted to get married, and his mother and father objected to me strenuously. I was not a rich girl. Okay? They had visions of Oscar was handsome. He played the violin. He was a doctor. And he should marry a rich girl. That was what they wanted. Well, I didn't fit the bill, see? So we broke off because there was no point. I would get aggravated, really, and there was no point. So, about 6 weeks, and I was working in Macy's already at that time. We couldn't get teaching jobs in New York. So after that summer, when I came back, I applied to Macy's, and I was hired as a Christmas person. Christmas came around. I was so dumb and naive. Everybody's getting pink slips, the girls, and I didn't get a pink slip. I didn't know what that was. So I go up to the thing and I said to them, why is everybody getting a pink slip? And I didn't get one. Because you've been hired permanently. And they remained as Christmas people. They were discharged with the pink slips. So I stayed in Macy's. I still have the button, buyer's representative in the glove department. And if I had remained there, I probably would have been in the higher echelon because, you get promoted.
Did you have experience in your dad's
Oh,
store?
sure. I worked. Oh, that's another thing. Coming back to Brooklyn, my sister was in the carriage, and I would be shaking her because I wanted to go into the store. And I helped in the store. And one of my father's competitors complained reported that my father hires a junior help, and I was in college at the time, yeah. So I worked in the store, and I had good experience, and apparently the experience must have shown because they kept me on in Macy's. So I worked in the glove department. It was an interesting. I had nice experiences there. One day, I'm in the glove department, as I said, and it was Christmas, and all the girls wanted to go home. It was Christmas Eve, and I was the only Jewish girl there, really. So I told them to go home, and I'll finish up. So what you had to do they wanted you, when you waited on a customer, you took out 3 pairs of gloves to show them. And then if they picked one out of the 3, you had to take the other 2 and put them back so they wouldn't get confused. And meanwhile, I'm there alone. I'm running up and down like a lunatic, up and down with customers. But, excuse me, it worked. It was fine. And all of a sudden, this big, huge woman comes up to the counter. She was huge. And her lady that was with her, came almost up to her hip, a little higher than her hip, maybe her shoulder, and she was big. So I see all of a sudden people are gathering around, and I didn't know why. And so I showed her the gloves, and she picked the gloves, and they had what they called a DA account in Macy's, depositor's account. What you did, you didn't have a charge account. You put your money into the bank there. That's the deposit account. So then when you bought something, that was deducted from your account, and the thing you had to send that thing that goes through a vault the tube, and you had to send that up, and they checked it, and if they checked it, then it was okay, and you got the slip back. And I get the slip back, and I look at the slip, and it was Kate Smith. And to this day, I remember her size. She was enormous. She really was enormous. And there were other episodes like that were.
Who was Kate Smith?
Kate Smith was a very popular singer of her day. She's the one that sang, "God bless America, land that I love, stand beside her," and that was her theme song. So Kate Smith was that one. That was another experience of my life. All right, so finally, I'm working in Macy's. Oscar and I break up. 6 weeks go by. I come home from working. My mother says, "You had a telephone call." I had a telephone call. It was a telephone call. It was from Oscar. So Oscar, I made up to meet him and so on. And then, before you know it, he wanted to get married. So my finally his mother and father wanted to meet my folks.
Do you recall those feelings during the 6 weeks?
Yeah, I was very aggravated, and I was very sick. I really was sick. I had lost I was down to a size 10. I was very thin. I'd gotten thin and aggravated because I really had concentrated on him, you know what I mean? And I'd had this Ludwig Teller that I had been going out with, and all of a sudden this thing happens, So, and his mother knew she had come up to the hotel in Sharon Springs, see, and she knew who I was. And she had nothing against me as a person, but she had it against me because I didn't fit a blueprint.
She had a different expectation.
A blueprint. I call them blueprints, and I didn't fit that blueprint.
So what had changed that he called you?
What had changed? He said he missed me and he didn't think he could live without me. It was as simple as that.
Well, Ken and I are certainly happy he made that
I
call.
bet you, I think so too. So absolutely. So then, so that was that, and yeah, I think so. Does your voice get into this thing when you talk too?
A little bit.
Yeah. So anyhow, so then it's time I had to go for the gown, and then it was before a certain holiday. I guess it was Shavuos or some holiday that you weren't allowed to get married during a certain period. It was a religious period of time. So we had to rush the marriage. So everybody decided that there was a reason why I had to rush the marriage.
What year was this?
1930. You were born in 38, so it was 1937. Right? Yeah, you were born like a year and a half afterwards. You were born in December. We were married in March of 37. Then you were born.
And did anything unusual happen on your honeymoon?
Anything usual. We went I'll tell you what happened. First of all, he took me on my honeymoon to a hotel in Manhattan, which he must have been very familiar with. Because I didn't know any E from A about these things. During those times, I told you, he took me to the Cotton Club. He was more sophisticated than I was. And so he took me to that. And then we went to the Morningside Hotel up in the Catskill Mountains for a weekend. It was nice, you know. We walked in the moonlight, and it was very nice. That part was nice. Then we came back, and what happened? I'm trying to remember where.
Wasn't there, oh, go ahead,
Wasn't there what?
a story about his mother going with you on some
Oh,
trip?
that's wait, I'll tell you. So we came back, and we lived. By this time he had his office with his mother and father in the house, in the Bronx.
He
See,
did?
yeah,
Well, tell me about that. I don't
yeah.
know that.
Well, he had an office in the Bronx. They lived in the Bronx, and he opened his office. His mother and father lived in the back, and he had the office, you know. And so then I had the room that he slept in, and that was where we were. I was very uncomfortable, to be honest with you. So,
Where were the other kids, Henry and
oh,
Leonard?
they were out of the house by this time. Henry was married, and Leonard was at school, and Elaine where was Elaine? Elaine was at school too, I guess. So anyhow, we're going on a honeymoon. Oscar couldn't go. We couldn't go right away. He had a maternity case, so he had to wait until he had delivered this Irish woman, and it was her fifth child or something like that. So so then we decide we'd go. He wanted, actually, what really happened was he wanted to move out of New York. He always wanted to move out of New York, and he thought that he would like to move to Florida. So we're going to go to Florida to investigate things. We so